G'day guys and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. If you missed last week's episode, I took Jackie up one of my local tracks, the notorious Monkey Gum. Broke both CVs and had to winch my way out. Join me on this episode as I walk you through the process of replacing my CVs, lower and upper board joints and tie rods. Disclaimer, I'm not a qualified mechanic, so take this video how you will. If you're liking my content, please consider liking and subscribing, even throw me a comment. Really appreciate it. Thanks guys. So we've got the wheels off, we've jacked the car up, it's on jack stands and the tyres are underneath the car too. We'll start by removing the hub with 6 10mm bolts. Once the bolts are removed, the hub should slide out. We then go and remove the circlip from the outside of the CV. After that, we use our 8mm Allen key to undo the 6 bolts, and the rest of it should slide off the CV. Up next is popping the ball joints for the inner and outer tie rod ends. Spray the castle nut with WD-40. Pull the split pin out, put the ball joint separator on after you remove the castle nut, tighten the separator down and watch the ball joint pop out of the socket. Now we've got heaps better access to remove the shocky. Hold the top with a pair of multis, 17mm spanner and undo the nut at the top. Next we've got to remove the bolt from the bottom of the shock. 19mm spanner and a 19mm socket will do. You may have to suppress the shock by hand to get the bolt out. If you can't do it by hand and it's too strong, you can use a pry bar underneath the bottom. I then jacked up the lower control arm to get the ball joints as level as I could. Remove the split pin, the castle nut, and then pop the ball joint out from the top. I was then able to get access to remove the outer CV shaft. To remove the top ball joint from the upper control arm, it's just 3 14mm bolts with nuts underneath. Once the bolts are removed, the ball joint will just pull up and out. It's the same process for the lower ball joint. Spray with WD-40, remove the split pin, remove the castle nut and use your ball joint separating tool. Once the ball joints are removed, it's a good idea to take the weight off the brake line and just cable tie your hub assembly up. Then it's just 4 nuts and bolts holding the ball joint onto the lower control arm. Repeat the same process for the inner tie rod ball joint. Once you've completed the same steps on the passenger side, it's time to drop the diff. The front diff mount has a nut and a bolt that's 22mm, and the rear diff mount just has a bolt. Now the diffs drop down enough, we can gain access to the 4 mounting plate bolts that hold the CV in. Make sure to put a spill container down because you'll get diff oil everywhere. Now you have to work the diff mount back and forth a bit, it's a really tight squeeze. Now that the diff mount's out, put it on the ground, remove the first circlip. Remove the bearing off the CV to expose the next circlip. Remove that circlip and then remove the seal, then the CV should come out of the diff mount. It's time to unbox my eBay special CV shafts. Now I always like to put a tiny bit of grease on the splines and just around the seals. It's now time to put the diff mount plate back on. I spray the inner seal with a bit of WD-40 and just give it a clean with a rag. Apply a small amount of grease to the seal and put it back onto the CV shaft. Apologies for the bad angle here, but next up, put the circlip back on, clean the bearing up, apply a small amount of grease to the bearing and slide it onto the shaft. You might have to give the bearing a slight tap with the hammer. Now it's time for the last circlip. It's very difficult to get the diff mount back in. It's a very tight squeeze. I managed to do it though. You just got to be careful when you're putting the spline back in the diff center. Rotate the CV and make sure the splines line up correctly. Otherwise they'll bind and you'll ruin the teeth. Put the 4 bolts back in for the mounting plate. Do the same on the passenger side. Now it's time to jack the diff back up, bolt it back to the chassis and move on to the next step. On this installation, I'm doing what's called a ball joint flip. It's where they put the ball joint underneath the upper control arm, therefore leveling out the upper control arm because I have a 2-inch lift. Mount the 3 bolts and tighten them up. When I was doing the lower ball joints, I ran into a major issue. The parts that I ordered said that they were right for my car, but the brackets were way too long. It was going to push the bottom of the tyre right out. Thought I'd give it a go and see how it went. I put them on, put the hub assembly back on, and it just looked ridiculous. Jackie looked like a drift car. So I went back to the shop, they refunded me my money, and they ordered me the correct ones. So I had to use the old ones. Now I had the old one back on, I was able to get the CV into the hub assembly, the lower ball joint in, with the bottom castle nut. I found that putting my jack underneath the lower ball joint helped me raise the whole control arm assembly so I could get the upper ball joint in. Once both castle nuts and ball joints were in, it was just a matter of tightening them up, lining up the holes for the split pins and putting the split pins in. It was time to put the shocky back in. The rubber goes on first, then the washer, then the nut. For the bottom mount, spray it with some WD-40. It will help the rubber slide in. Put the bolt through, you might have to give the shock a wiggle side to side. The washer on, the nut on, and tighten her up. This is where I decided to put the hubs back together. I put some grease on the face to keep the water out. Now I like to take my time and do it gently, putting the hubs back on the CV. I don't want to mismatch the splines. On goes the washer spacer and then the circlip. In go the 8mm Allen key bolts. I like to run grease as insurance on the face just so water doesn't find its way in. Grease up the hub, ready to be put back in the center. Now be careful when putting the hub back in. You have to keep rotating it around until the splines really line up nicely and it goes in easily. Clean up the threads with a bit of brake cleaner and put the 10mm bolts back in. Whatever you do, don't over tighten these. You don't want to crack the housing. Check the functionality of your hubs, lock them and unlock them again, make sure they're working smoothly. Now I'm putting new tie rods on here. I've set them similar to the old ones, but I'm going to have to go and get a wheel alignment. There's not much I can do about it. So for now, I'll just put them on, tighten the castle nuts down, put a split pin through it, and it'll be good enough to drive to a shop close by so I can get a wheel alignment. We'll pull the tyre out from under the car, pull the wheel nuts off, get the tyre on, do the wheel nuts up and see how it rolls. Well, that's the end of the episode, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you do like this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments. I can go through a lot more stuff. I do this all the time on Jackie. Always breaking and fixing it. But yeah, let me know. Really appreciate it if you made it this far in the video. Check out some of the other content on my channel. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks guys, I appreciate it heaps.